Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of Multifamily Pros. We are cranking these out. I cannot believe the guests that we've been able to get on these past shows, and this one is no different. Thank you so much for being here, Danielle and Stephanie. I'm sure a lot of people in this audience have seen Stephanie speak in the past. I certainly have been following along your speaking journey. You have so much amazing stuff to say, and thank you for being here. And Danielle, I can't believe that you are one of the original people from Avenue5. I was so shocked to hear that when I talked to you. I also had my very first job in the industry at Riverstone Residential, who eventually became Avenue5 after their non-compete was up. So I feel like we're connected from the beginning of our careers. Was Riverstone your first industry role, or were you before that?
Riverstone was my first industry role. So
nice.
Yep.
Lots of good careers were made there. Shout out, pour it out for Riverstone. Well, let's get to the topic at hand here. It's moving. We are in the multifamily property management space. We handle a lot of things, not just moving. We're dealing with multi-million-dollar assets, giant portfolios. We're dealing with residents throughout the entire life cycle of their lease. But I want to focus on one aspect today, the suckiest aspect, and that is moving. Moving is terrible. Do you know how many times off the top of your head, or like ballpark, how many times you've moved?
Probably at least 20.
That's a lot. I can tell you the last time that I moved, it was from a Riverstone turned Greystar property, which was the first property that I ever worked at. I lived there too. And I was on the fourth floor, and it was only stairs, fourth floor walk up. And it was an absolute nightmare to move in and out. And I did not hire a moving company. Luckily, all my furniture was from IKEA. So it pretty much like turned to dust when I touched it. I should have just thrown it out in the trash. But it was a nightmare. And moving really is like, there's tons of articles online saying that moving is the third most stressful life event, just after death of a loved one and divorce. And so we are, as an industry, we're not selling people coffee. We are dealing with a really, really important life-changing aspect, the third most stressful thing that can happen. So today I want to talk about how we can make that easier.
I have moved 10 times, 10 exactly.
Oh my gosh.
But all of but one was from my adulthood. So I only moved once as a child when I was in middle school, which is probably the worst time ever to move because that's such an impressionable age and just horrible timing. Luckily didn't have to change schools, but all of my moving really was from adulthood. And I blame the apartment industry because I was working in the apartment industry, for all of that time. And, you move to different properties, new construction happening, gotta keep up with the Joneses, all of those things. But I don't recommend it.
What is your most crazy moving story?
I don't know that I have a crazy move story. I mean, I will say this. My dad had, because you mentioned the IKEA furniture. So my dad in his free time loves to woodwork, and he has his own shop and everything. And he loves to just build these beautiful pieces. And so he made me this entertainment center, because that was before, like flat screens and, all the things. He made me this beautiful entertainment center and gave it to me as a Christmas gift. And I decided on Christmas Eve before I got it that I was going to move apartments the day after Christmas. And I was on a third floor walk up, moving to another community across town. And I didn't tell him because I was still kind of iffy if I was going to move or not. And so we literally put this huge piece of like oak wood. So, I mean, it is like massive, carrying it up. And I had 3 of my guy friends come over and do it. And literally all the way up, third story walk up. And then we had to move it literally the week later. And so my dad was a little salty about it for a while. He would bring it up as sort of like, a dig when we were joking around. And so to this day, I still kind of feel guilty about that. But such is life. So I don't know if that's crazy, but it was definitely memorable.
Before we get into how we can make moving better for our residents, let's hear a little bit about you. So Danielle, tell us your story. Tell us about your role at Avenue5 and your role previous to that.
Yeah. So I joined the industry in 2012 with Riverstone in the renter's insurance department. So kind of worked all my way up through that. And then when Avenue5 began, I kind of jumped on board. And as a startup company, kind of threw a lot of things my way. So I went from renter's insurance to screening to deposit alternatives to credit reporting and fraud alternatives. So kind of got a lot of different things thrown my way because we were at that time a very small company. So kind of just tried to become an expert in all of those things. And that's where I am today.
So Grace Hill, which many of you know as training, we are so much more than training now. I always say, if you haven't seen us in the past 12 months, you don't know Grace Hill. So you have to check us out. But Grace Hill, the umbrella, is our policy training and assessment solutions. We really focus on helping to increase the resident and tenant renewals because we also service commercial in addition to multifamily. We reduce operating risk, improve your NOI. And, you know, we have taken our passion into purchasing more companies and really expanding our portfolio of solution offerings. And that's where Kingsley Surveys comes in. So we purchased Kingsley Surveys back in 2019. And, you know, our prime purpose behind that was really having that survey assessment type solution, because ultimately it's all about the data. What I think, what Danielle thinks, what you, Sydney, think is all different. And then what our resident or potential residents think is a whole nother story. And so how do we capture that data that really helps us to make meaningful decisions? Well, that's really what Kingsley Surveys does. They capture actionable insights on really the entire customer experience. Specifically for multifamily, they look at that resident life cycle with prospect surveys, move-in surveys, work order surveys, pre-renewals, and then of course move outs. For me specifically at Grace Hill, I am their Senior Director of Communications and Social Media. I handle their public relations, their, of course, social media, their webinars, their content that we produce both in marketing and, you know, I basically do anything that they ask me to do because I love the company so much. And that's where a lot of these great insights that I'll be able to share today come from, is really things that we are trying to get out in the marketplace to help owners and operators understand what their residents want.
And what I love so much about Grace Hill and Kingsley is your data, the amount of people participating in these surveys is so broad. One of the stats that we're going to be sharing today, the focus group was like 96,000 people. So, you know, it's not just like we sent out a survey and 30 people responded. Like it really runs the gamut of, you know, different locations, different demographics, different asset classes. Like there's so much in there to play with. And it really helps us, at least us as a company, as Updater, really know what direction to go in with our business, because we know what residents care about because of you. So here at Updater, and as you've just noticed from the title of this event called the Move-In Effect, we have coined this phrase called move-ins matter. Clearly they matter. They're incredibly important in a person's life. And I personally, as a person who started on site and worked into a marketing role, I've held a lot of different roles in this industry. Move-ins are not something that we talk about that much, especially as a marketer. We talk about leads, and then we talk about, you know, resident events and like keeping the residents happy and retention. And there's like this kind of black hole in the journey that is one of the only manual, like, gathering everything processes left in our resident journey. So we talk about move-ins, obviously, as a company a lot here at Updater. But Danielle, is that something you guys talk about very much at Avenue5?
Yes. So, I mean, the move-in experience dictates that residents' journey throughout they're going to stay at the property. If they have a positive outlook on the property from day one, or if it's, you know, a negative move-in experience, it kind of goes downhill from there. And you have to go a lot more to get that experience to be a positive one if move-in is a rough time. I know this summer we had a huge push at our senior leadership conference on focusing on move-ins and looking at surveys that were taken to see how we're doing, where we can improve, and how we can really move the measure to make sure that it's a positive experience, because it is so stressful, not only for our residents, but also for our leasing agents and all the things that have to be accomplished on both ends of side of the making sure the resident is happy and also making sure that all of their tasks have to be completed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like I can't enable the chat for this, so just treat the Q&A like it's a chat. And my first prompt for you is, how many times a week do you think that you are thinking about, or your team is talking about, specifically move-ins? Go ahead and drop that in the Q&A. So you said something to me that was really interesting when we first chatted, Danielle, because I was like, so you're in charge of, project screening and credit. Why are you the main point of contact for Updater? And you told me something really interesting. And you told me that before you moved into this new role, you actually were on a SWAT team task force that only focused on the early side of the resident life cycle, from lead to move in. Can you tell me about why Avenue5 decided to assemble this SWAT force, task force of the brightest minds to focus on this one specific part of the journey?
So our big thing is under ancillary services, we're working with a lot of different suppliers, and it made it a lot easier to have the beginning of a resident's life cycle so our operations teams would know who to go through. So if it's screening or insurance or update or finding out things that are happening at the beginning, deposit alternatives, things that a resident is going to touch immediately. It made it really easy for our operators to know exactly who that team was and the contact people to go to in order to kind of make sure that they're doing the right things for that section. And then kind of once they're become a resident, then they're moving on to other parts of our teams to help kind of guide our team. So, as we grow into a very large company, it makes it easier so that operators know exactly who to contact, as opposed to kind of being all over the place.
That's smart. It kind of makes me think about this whole conversation around centralized leasing. Give individuals a very clear job duty to really focus on and perfect, versus the I wear so many hats that we've all said throughout our entire career. It helps you become more successful when you can really hone in and focus on one or a small set of things.
It does, and it's really helped, I think, our teams.
Nice. So when you assembled this group that only focused on the early part of the resident life cycle, what did you uncover?
We found that they're kind of grouped into different areas. So screening, right, is always a big one, with screening and fraud protection and kind of going through all the steps that may get overlooked to make sure that we're getting the best residents as possible. And then kind of tying it into the next pieces, which undermine, so like deposit alternatives or renter's insurance, which are other huge big things that happen at the beginning that have to get taken care of. Are you taking a deposit? Are you offering other alternatives? And insurance is a pretty popular one. So kind of just focusing on the big things that need to happen. And then, there's other things that happen throughout, like we'll say utility services, that has to happen at the beginning, but also falls throughout their entire residency. So trying to get the initial parts so that we could make sure that the residents are all getting what they need over to our leasing agents, and kind of specializing in those individual departments so that they're highly educated in what that is and what needs to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Danielle, Kingsley has a lot of data around this topic of the early stage of the resident life cycle. And honestly, the data that you released several years ago, I think it was back in 2017, 2018, is some data we really used as a company to help plan our direction and what we were going to build for the industry. So what prompted Kingsley to study the early part of the resident life cycle?
It's a great question. What was found many years ago was that there was not a company or really a technology out there that would study all aspects of the resident journey. And we knew that this information was really important, but for multifamily apartment management companies, it was difficult to gather that data. When you think about everything that a company has to do on a daily basis, it just wasn't a priority. Now, apartment companies knew knew that if they could have data like that, it would be very, very integral for them to have it and make decisions from it. But it just wasn't something that was easy to do. And in fact, a lot of times, if you were collecting that data, even if you didn't have a sophisticated platform or system to utilize for it, who was analyzing that data and who was actually doing something with it? Because again, it's hard with only a certain amount of head count, and you've got a lot of other priorities to do. It just wasn't a priority for them. So it was great because Kingsley was developed out of that as a way to really collect that data, being very specific to multifamily, and even when they opened up to commercial, the idea was to collect this data that other companies weren't doing. I mean, when you look at other places, NAA does things, NMHC, IRM. You also have like CEL Associates. There's tons of companies out there that do data, but none specifically focused on the resident life cycle as a whole and doing it consistently. Because when you'll see national reports, they might just do one little part of it, or they might do it every few years or as it's important. But for us, this is something that was a commitment that owners and operators could sign on for to really do it consistently. And I think that was really key for that mindset of to collect the data in a meaningful way.
And over the course of several years, I mean, some of the data that we're going to talk about today is how move-ins impact likelihood to renew. And you can't really just, it's hard to just anecdotally ask people, but I mean, you have to be following these residents for a year plus to know exactly the impact this early stage activity has.
You're going beyond those basic satisfaction ratings. So it's one thing to ask residents one or two questions, or to even ask them to do a Google review, which are very important, and we want those, but you really have to go beyond those basics and those ratings to uncover the drivers that make a difference in your overall customer experience. That's really the key to this. And a lot of that is the software that we use, right? And having the ability to utilize that. But I would say, furthermore, you've got to ask the right questions. And let me tell you, that is tricky because our team works really hard to analyze those questions year over year. How are you asking them? Is it easy for the renter to understand what the question is so that they answer it correctly, or that they don't get frustrated with the survey and just exit out of it and say, I'm not going to complete it?
So one of the things that we talked about earlier was retention. And I think it's pretty clear that the move-in day sets the tone for the entire lease. We all know that in our hearts. Can you tell us that for a fact based on your study? Is that accurate?
It's very accurate. I can't say it in more clear terms than, people decide if they're going to renew with you before they ever even sign a lease with you. So if that tells you just how meaningful it is, they have to experience it, and they know that those experiences are going to make a huge difference in what happens. So if you have a horrible move-in experience, the data shows that even if you have had a great experience, years later, you're still going to go back to that move-in, and you're either going to still be salty about it, or you're going to tell everybody how amazing it was. Either way, it was definitely memorable for you. And I don't know if you want me to tap into the data, or okay.
I sure do.
Didn't want to steal your thunder or anything.
No, it's yours. Just grab
so
it.
I think what's really important to note here from this statistic that I'm going to share with you is, oftentimes people will kind of give me a little bit of a side eye, but I stand behind this truth. Anything that happened pre-pandemic a lot of times becomes irrelevant in our current environment. It's not to say everything is, but a lot of times the studies that we continue to look at in multifamily are pre-pandemic, and we have to know that things definitely changed significantly. So for this number specifically, this was right at the onset of the pandemic in 2020. So the data we're looking at is pretty much everything that happened there and after, which is important to note for this. But, we had a total of 96,291 responses, and this date range started in 2020, but then it carried on through August 31st of this year. So you can't get more relevant than that, Sydney. But out of those responses, 79% of residents who were satisfied at move-in remained satisfied at renewal, and 20% of those that were in fact dissatisfied at move-in became satisfied at renewal?
79%.
Mm-hmm.
That is an extremely high number of people that you've maintained satisfaction with for a year.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Sometimes you think about numbers and you're like, oh, it's kind of like that 51, percent. It just gets you over, the halfway point. But 79, I think the people have spoken.
And only being able to recover 20% of those dissatisfied move-ins.
Correct.
So we know how much this matters. Move-ins matter, hashtag move-ins matter. Clearly, we don't have to just think about it and like feel it. It's not a feeling anymore. It's data backed.
Yes.
So we know that it matters. How do we make move-ins great? Danielle, can you talk to us a little bit about what Avenue5 is doing to make this move-in process successful for your residents?
I mean, outside of the, everyday things of making sure that the unit is as maintained as possible, that it's looking as good as what you're selling during the tours and online leasing. I think a big part is taking as much of it off of the day as move-in as possible and communicating with your residents or future residents what's going to happen, what they're going to see in their inboxes, all the things that have to get done before they can get keys and start that process. Because I mean, moving all your stuff is already stressful. And if you get there and you don't have something that you have to have, that is the worst experience. And especially for, your leasing agents also being like, oh, you have everything except for this one piece of information. So making sure that they know exactly what they need to do, and not to be that, but Updater is really great in that it outlines exactly what has to be done. So the utilities that have to get set up, the requirements for renter's insurance, making sure all of the correct deposit information has been submitted. So just making sure that they have that, they can see that the check marks are done, that they've taken care of it, and really communicating how the resident wants to communicate. If they want to communicate via email, or if they want to communicate with phone call or text, but communicating with them how they want to be communicated with, versus just assuming that, spamming their inbox or trying to pick up the phone, or, waiting for them to call you, which is also not helpful at all. So really kind of dial into each specific resident that's moving in, what they prefer, and then making sure that it's done before that day so that everything is smooth. You can hand off the keys and they're good to go.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than someone showing up and be like, I'm ready to move in. And you're like, no, you're not. You're not getting until you call the electric company. Yeah, thank you for saying that. So we've talked a lot about residents and how important this is and how we should make this smooth for them. But something that we also have to talk about in this industry, obviously, is on-site teams. Move-ins are no walk in the park for them. What is Avenue5 doing to make that process more manageable for your on-site teams?
We try to take as much off of their plate as we possibly can, to not have them have to, explain all of the different pieces that they have to do, but to really try to automate it so that the resident sees that information, and it's not the leasing agent having to continue reaching out and asking for that or doing another step that they have to do, but trying to remove all of the manual things off of their plate so that if the resident enters something, that it's automatically updated in the system, or if they've provided insurance, that it's automatically sent over and they don't have to do another thing. It's not one more thing they have to ask the resident for. And then the resident says, I already submitted that, why don't you have it? They're really trying to take as much off of their plate so that they can also have an easy experience on their end, that everything's already done and they don't have to do 20 other things outside of the normal day-to-day craziness that is move-ins and all the things that, they have to help with customer service aspects of working with the resident to make sure that their experience is positive.
Yeah, we have, our survey set is not 96,000 like yours at Kingsley, but we have surveyed quite a few on-site leasing teams. Just broadly at conferences, we bring a survey with us. And correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, they spend about 3 hours a week just working on move-in related tasks?
Yeah, that's right, Sydney. It's 4 to 6 actually.
4 to 6 hours a week working on move-in related tasks. And if you think about what we hire on-site team members for, like skill set wise, they're hired because they're personable and they're great at customer service and they can make people feel at home. And to be burdened by that much administrative stuff is really challenging. And I'm sure when we all go to OpTech next week, we'll learn about different ways that AI and automation is going to be helping alleviate some of that manual work from our on-site teams, which then in turn can provide a better experience for residents. So Stephanie, over to you. What has Kingsley uncovered when it comes to actual impact on renewal rates? And when should property management companies start thinking about renewals?
Definitely it's important to know that whatever happens in the move-in process is going to trickle down to their entire resident life cycle that they're with you. We kind of spoke about that a little bit before. One of the interesting things that we have found is there is a direct correlation between the amount of people leaving the industry or property or changing jobs, because obviously turnover is the highest it has ever been in our industry. And there's a direct correlation between people leaving and that move-in experience. And one of the things that specifically was noted in some of the surveys that we got for move-ins was focused on showing up to the office or showing up on move-in day and no one even knew to expect them. And what they learned later was that if they worked with James and James is no longer there and that ball dropped somewhere, so what we're working on right now is a offboarding checklist, because we focus so much about onboarding with employees, but when you look at offboarding, one of the main things is really communicating, as people are leaving or jobs are changing, because let's say they're not leaving the industry completely, but there is a lot of change. We're promoting people, opportunities for advancement, new construction down the street. We're moving a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And what happens when you lose that historical data at your property, i.e. a person that has been there for a good amount of time, and how does that then directly correlate to the resident and their overall experience?
Yeah. I certainly remember the days of my paper guest card, my paper move-in checklist and welcome sheet the little folder that had the Pizza Hut gift cards in it. Not that you shouldn't stop giving away gift cards. But you're right. I mean, especially now, people could get sick and be out for 2 weeks. And
Yes.
if everything that you're doing, the way that you're managing all of your customers, prospects, current residents, future residents, isn't in one centralized database that is completely transparent to everyone, it's really easy for something to happen and a ball to get dropped. And you kind of don't really get that moment back with that future resident of that walking in and not feeling like, welcome to your new home. It's like, who are you? What are you doing here? It's got to be a really unnerving feeling when you just like uprooted your entire life.
You had, one chance to make that lasting first impression.
Yeah.
No pressure.
So Danielle, at Updater, we found that people moving. So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. So let's say we get the move-in process down. We have all of the main core things in a row that they're prepped. They have the utilities. They have everything they need to get their keys. There's another thing that we don't think about. We maybe should start thinking about as an industry is people moving are in hyper spend mode. Updater has found that people in the process of moving are 4 times more likely to explore new providers, meaning their brand loyalties are shifting. It makes their spending habits change. I mean, if you fly across the country, you're going to switch your yoga studio. You're going to go to new restaurants, do coffee shops. And we actually have our own data. Again, not quite as large as Stephanie's, but pretty significant, that when Updater recommends a specific TV and internet provider from the community, it has a little tag that says recommended by the community. It's led to a 27% rise in that provider's market share within the community. So ultimately, if you're a management company, there's a lot of opportunities to get some more ancillary revenue off of your movers. They're spending a lot of money. How is Avenue5 thinking about increasing, NOI through ancillary income when it comes to moving?
I think a big part is just because we are in so many, different areas and regions across the country. Our first piece is to listen to our operators and what they're hearing. So what are residents asking for? What are they hearing from their leasing agents that people are not receiving or want to have at their property? And really using that and kind of working to see what's out in the market, see what suppliers are offering those. If it's something that's a national program, if it's not national, we can find, local, or try and help out our operators to find something that will help fit that need. I think that's the biggest piece. Right now, we're really focusing on credit reporting to try and get our residents credit for the biggest expense that they're making each month, to show it as a positive thing that we want you to rent, we want you to do that, and also get the credit for it so that you can build your credit history, look at buying a home in the future, that we're not just interested in you renting from us, but also looking at your future as well, that we want to help support you in that. And we're only reporting positive rental data, so it's not like we're reporting if they're not paying rent. It's not a negative to them in any way, but really trying to offer that ancillary option to them. And we're also looking at deposit alternatives and showing, because again, the biggest piece is coming up with that deposit at move-in. If especially moving from another apartment community, you're probably waiting on the deposit to come back from when you're moving out, but you also have to pay a larger deposit up front, and moving that and seeing what is out there and what works for the residents, to give them options on what that looks like for them. So that's kind of what we're focusing on right now.
I love that, listening to the customers. And I mean, the idea of your rent being reported to the credit bureau, and that it's 2023 and this is only now starting to happen over the last few years. Shout out to, I believe it's Rent Dynamics has that Rent Plus program. And I know that there's others in the industry, but it's really incredible that they're doing that. I mean, you're consistently making a huge investment every single month. It should show up in your credit. I mean, it's not as much as your car payment.
No, it's not. And if people who are paying their mortgages get the positive credit on their credit report and the positive rental history. So we really want to make sure that our residents have that as well, because they're paying a large amount each month, and they should get that credit for paying that and paying that timely. So I'm excited that the credit bureaus are finally seeing that is important, and allowing us to report that to them so that they can get that
Absolutely
boost.
So Avenue5, also something I forgot to say in the beginning of this episode, is that Danielle did tell me that since I think you started the company within like 6 months of them being founded, you helped take them from 10,000 to 110,000 units under management. Woohoo! And you're on the NMHC top 50 consistently, like every year, which is amazing. But you're 100% third-party manager.
Yeah,
that was not my life. I was an owner manager. It was cake. I only had to convince one person of this is the software I wanted. This is the tech stack. It was, I have never experienced what it is like to be a third party manager, and how challenging it must be with all the different technology providers out there, and having to sell the suite that you'd like to use to the different ownership groups across the country. Can you tell me a little bit about what that's like, how Avenue5 approaches that?
Yeah. So there are a lot of different suppliers, and my piece is just a small piece. We also have our marketing teams and the other part of my ancillary team. And I think a big piece is educating on why we've selected the suppliers we have selected, and also having options, so that we're not dictating to anyone that, you have to use this because we decided that this is what we're going to use, but really educating them on why we selected the programs we selected, and also having options so that, like I said, we've worked with all these people, we've narrowed it down to these 2 or 3 options. Here's what these people, this supplier does, here's what this supplier does, what works best for you and your property and your market. And the residents you're looking to have at your property, what works best for you and your asset, so that they can kind of see the pros and cons of each different supplier, what they're offering, and kind of work with what works best for their property individually or their portfolio individually, as opposed to, just something we're telling them that we want them to do. So really having that option and working with them to make sure that they know what we're looking at and why we're doing it as well.
Yeah, you act as more like a consultative partner and let them, I mean, that's their portfolio.
Yeah, we're all partners together.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a big investment, and certain people want to have more say in what's happening, and other people are just like, make it work, and I'll look at Yardi later, or whatever platform you use. So I did not prepare you with this question, but selfish question. What can your supplier partners do to make that part of your job easier? To give you the tools you need to go to an owner and say, here are your options. We've vetted them. Here's what you need to consider.
I think the biggest piece is integration and how it works within our current on-site system. Because again, if I'm having our leasing team asking them to go to another platform or another outside thing, it's one more thing they have to take care of. So the more it works within our on-site system and it's seamless for our residents as well as our leasing teams, that's a huge sell. If it's more manual work outside of something, it makes it really hard, because then we're asking for them to do more, and they already have so many things on their plate already that we don't want to ask that. So I think the number one thing that we look for with our suppliers is, are you integrating with what we're doing right now? And are you going to take, something off of our residents or off of our leasing team's plate that you can now take care of for them? So I think those are our biggest positives when we're looking at suppliers.
Awesome. Absolutely. So, Stephanie, do you think the current economic environment will affect how property management companies think about move-ins? And I'm asking this specifically because, do you see a shift in the way we're thinking about retention versus just net new leases?
I think so. I think that data will be necessary versus optional when it comes to making decisions that are going to affect that. And when I say decisions around that, think about it in terms of staffing, centralization models, resident amenities, any of the things that we do from an operational standpoint is going to be really key, because that is going to impact that entire resident experience. I have to mention the I word, inflation. I think that still makes a difference, as we can continue to see that, our employees are wanting higher wages. We've got residents who are their cost of living is exceeding what their income is, and how that kind of all the pieces here are put together. We continue to see an uptick in fraud. And with that tying into this, it all goes back to, once a resident is moved in and they're a good resident, you want to keep them as long as possible, especially when they're there and they're paying and all the things, versus taking the risk of, the inflated costs with turnover for apartments. And then you've got to take that one step further, with the possibility that they could be fraudulent applicants. And then you have eviction and lots of money not hitting the bank. So it's kind of like that whole domino effect. The other thing I think I'll mention, I kind of said it a minute ago with the centralization, but when we looked at what the top challenges were for owners and operators, the number one top one, with 76% of respondents said that operational efficiencies are really primary for their focus right now. And when you think about that, that ties back into that staffing model, the centralization, their thought process of how do we make that resident journey smoother. And that can include AI. It can include their technology, the integration, like Danielle said. I mean, there's all these moving pieces to the puzzle. And I really feel like it'll continue to be more mandatory that we have that data to support our decisions that we're making.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to spill the beans to everyone on this call, because you will be the first to know, but my team has been hard at work. Halloween is my favorite holiday, and it is coming up in a week. And for that, I will give you all a Halloween present. The Updater team has been compiling a report, which we're calling the Move in Effect report. And it has gathered data from our own personal data, the data that Danielle has shared from Kingsley, Stephanie has shared from Kingsley today, that has not been published yet by Kingsley. So it is fresh, hot off the, like, ripped straight from the surveys. And I'm going to be sending it to everyone. The update team is going to be sending it to everyone on this call right afterwards, or within the next hour or so, like gather ourselves together. But we're going to be sending it to you today. You'll see it before anyone else. It is a lengthy report that covers all the different topics we've talked about today. It covers retention and how move-ins affect satisfaction. It covers like costs of turnover that we've pulled from different places. So if you're looking for just a complete resource that is everything you really need to know when it comes to move-ins and how they can financially impact your business, from a resident retention to an employee turnover and performance to ancillary revenue, it's all going to be in there. So happy Halloween to you, my friends. You'll be receiving that shortly. So if you're feverishly writing down what Stephanie's saying, don't worry about it. It's all in the report. And if she says more interesting things that we didn't add, we're going to go back and add it later. So you don't need to take notes. So forecasting a little bit, we think that resident retention is something that's really going to be a hot topic for everyone. Obviously, inflation is not only affecting the cost of living for our residents, but it's affecting the supply cost and labor cost for us to turn apartments into market apartments and to have on-site staff that can like manage leads and everything. So, Danielle, step back, put on your fortune teller hat, and let's dream about what you think the future is going to look like in maybe the next few years in multifamily. How do you think the early stages of the resident life cycle is going to evolve? And you can talk about things that don't exist yet. That's totally fine. Someone in the audience might be like wanting to start their own prop tech company, and you're going to inspire them. So what is the perfect world? What do you think it's going to look like in a few years, 5 to 10 years?
I mean, as from what we saw from the pandemic, I think we're going to see a lot less people going in and doing all of the in-person things. I think we're going to maintain some of that, but I think a lot of people, and especially as we move into, Gen Z being more in renting more units, we're going to see more, texting and online, and as opposed to in-person and phone calls. So I think really developing that and really just making sure that we're adapting to the newer generations, but also not forgetting that we're servicing all generations, and making sure that, we're maintaining that customer service and really focusing on, what amenities we're offering, what we're marketing to, where we're marketing to, and especially in the different regions. I mean, it's just so vast, and there's so many different things. You have everything right from student living to senior living. So kind of just really, I think that it's going to depend on where you're at and what you're marketing to, but I really think that we're going to see a lot more automations happening versus the old school of calling and seeing if you're going to attend your in-person, view of an apartment. So that's my small crystal ball, but
smart to think and look to student housing for ideas. I've had lots of conversations with student housing, like marketing leaders and ancillary services managers. And they really kind of are just a few years ahead of us, all the rest of us. And so they're great ideas to pull from. Obviously, this process is slightly different. You're renting a bed and not a room necessarily, but they're doing a lot of really cool things, especially when it comes to marketing and building amenities for residents. And, those kids are going to age out of college housing and into the general market of conventional housing. So something to really consider. Obviously, Stephanie, I'm not going to leave without you putting on your fortune teller hat and rubbing your crystal ball. Tell us what you imagine the future of the early part of the resident journey to be.
So interestingly enough, before I saw the results of some secret data that I'm actually going to share here today, before I saw that, I am a big component, which this could still be accurate, of course. But everybody talks about AI, and I do love AI. I love technology. I love all of the things that it can do until it doesn't work. And then I'm so flustered, but I do love it. However, I get the question a lot, should people be worried about their jobs? Are people changing staffing models? I have heard some clients say that they are changing their staffing models in terms of how many people are at a certain location. With that being said, though, I firmly believe that AI coupled with HI, human intelligence, is going to be the key to unlocking your ROI, your highest ROI potential. It's going to come from the two of those together. That means that I can have the best AI in the world, but if I don't have the best people out there to couple that, it's not going to be successful, and vice versa. If we had the most amazing people, if the three of us were, had our own apartment community and we're leasing as amazing as all three of us are, I still think that we would fail if we did not have that technological component. So I think that you have to have both of those together. I have heard a lot of people saying things like it's really not necessary to have people on site anymore, and that you really can do everything online, which again, I hate to plug the whole surveys thing, but I really think that that's where it's key, is because you really have to meet residents where they are. They want instant gratification, but that doesn't always mean with a computer telling them. That instant gratification can also come from a human. So I wanted to share something with you. The Renter Preferences Survey, which is a partnership we do with NMHC, Grace Hill does. We actually survey every 2 years. It is a really, really big deal. We have anywhere from 170,000 to 200,000 residents across the nation. And these are large companies, small companies, all of them. We sent their resident surveys, and I mean, it's like 45 questions that they answer each. I mean, it is a huge survey, and that information we get is really, really crucial. What's really cool about this is I'm going to share with you a stat today that's on a national level, but you can also purchase regional reports. So, I know Danielle mentioned earlier how things change from market to market, and it really does. And so we drill down on the data so much that you can see from a national perspective. But if you are looking specifically into a certain region or market, you can just purchase that specific area, especially if you have a new construction deal, you're going to be refinancing, you're looking to get into third party in that market, whatever you're looking at, I feel like that data is going to be really key. So I think this also ties into Debbie, who was in the Q&A box, and she was talking about people moving here to Vegas and that they're leasing all online, sight unseen. So when they actually move there, you have to have that. It's that much more pressure for the move-in experience to be great. So I feel like I need like a drum roll or something happening. But my data showed that 68% of renters find it necessary to, on their move-in day, when they're coming in, that they have a physical person there and that they do a walk-in or orientation, depending on what you would call it, with someone working there, and that is essential for them. 68% of renters.
Wow.
That's a big deal, especially as you think about staffing, like we talked about. If you're talking about doing a lot of AI, that's all great. And I think that it is necessary, but you've got this other human component that's going to be really key. And because Halloween is coming up and it's Sydney's favorite holiday, I'm going to give you one more that I thought was really relevant as it pertains. I love data. Let me just find it here. That really goes based on rental behavior, but future rental behavior, because we kind of mentioned that a little bit. When thinking about their next rental home, 83% of renters report that their management company and people that they work with impact their future lease decision. 83%. So when you're thinking about this whole entire move-in experience in this resident journey, 83% of them are determining from that moment if they are in fact going to renew their lease with you or with your management company. So if they get moved to a whole different city or area, are they going to go to an Avenue5, a Greystar, a UDR? Are they going to go to those because that's what they like? Or are they going to specifically say no and go to your competitor?
Well, wow, that stat's better than anything else. Emily, feverishly type and add that one to the front page. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like we're just all very lucky to get to know that a week early. I'm sure you're going to be releasing some of that data at OpTech. You have
We
a
are.
job.
We are. We
I
have a
will be
session at
there.
OpTech we're going to do. And then, of course, if you want to purchase any of the reports, national, the local one, all the good stuff, we are going to start selling that on November 2nd at OpTech. And it's going to be amazing. This is really, really good data for your companies to have. So I'm so excited about it. Oh, and the best part is there's a new thing this year that we've never done before. Thanks to Kingsley Surveys, Grace Hill Company, we have a dashboard because oftentimes you don't know how to analyze the data and what to do with it. And we're going to help you to do all of that. So can you tell I'm excited?
If you would have told 16-year-old Sydney who thought she was going to be on Broadway that she'd be getting this giddy over renter data, she would have not believed you, but here we are today. And I wanted to say one more thing that Debbie said in the chat. She said, yes, the first day is so important. They want a personal guide. And I would like to also put on my prediction hat. I think that the way our on-site teams work with residents and future residents is going to change so much in the future. I think that we'll be able to hire the most charming, bubbly, amazing customer service focused person on the planet. And they're going to be able to be so good at what they're good at, which is interfacing with humans as human. And I think there's going to be a lot of really brilliant minds in the background on the vendor side and the operator side, making sure the technology is working and is frictionless, is integrating beautifully. Anything that can be automated is automated. Anything that can be managed by AI is managed by AI seamlessly. And on-site teams will no longer be exhausted. Their cup will be full because their job will be to have amazing interactions with residents, which is why they want that job, is why they're good for that job. And they're not going to be in the back filing paperwork and popping between 17,000 different dashboards. That is my prediction of the industry. I think I'm very hopeful. I think that's what's going to happen. I think centralization is going to play a big part in that. I think what you said earlier, Danielle, really good integrations is going to play a part in that. I've been on the vendor side for a few years now, and it is so fun to see how generous we are with each other. The vendors are really having great partnerships, talking to each other, building integrations and bringing in our operator partners to tell us what they need out of those integrations. And it's just been really cool to be a part of. And I'm excited to maybe the three of us will get together in a couple of years and see if our predictions have come true. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up, Danielle?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. It was great to be on this webinar, and I appreciate it.
Well, I will see you. I will be front row at your session at OpTech next week. Same with you, Stephanie. Any parting thoughts?
You know, as stressful as being on site can be and all of the nuances and moving pieces and everything that happens, I would say once you really are consistent with staying in compliance of everything you need to do, right, all those boxes you need to check because it's really important for that consistency, I would say do something to make it memorable. You know, the best thing that you can ever do is just make a moment, you know, moments that matter. Just really do something, and it doesn't have to be expensive, be unique, but make sure you're memorable because it's important to people and they will remember during renewal time every time.
It's very funny that you say that because I'm using this book to hold up my microphone called The Power of Moments.
Perfect.
Not planned. Have not finished it yet, but it was given to me by my amazing colleague and boss, Jenna, who's on this call. So thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate you. If you are here, look forward to the Move in Effect report. Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for being here. And thanks for everyone in the attendees. Sorry that the chat wasn't on fire. Won't make that mistake again. But thank you so much for your time today, Danielle and Stephanie. I know it's really busy with budgets and OpTech, so thank you so much for this. And you'll all be receiving the Move in Effect report. Share it far and wide. We're going to publish the heck out of it. It's going to be on LinkedIn. Kingsley will be featured, as well as a bunch of other amazing partners that we enjoy and that you'll know as well. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.